Hey everybody, welcome. This is I've done plenty of LinkedIn lives over the years, but this is the first time that I'm trying to do an office hours in support of my LinkedIn learning classes. If you know anything about StreamYard, you probably know that you know we don't know you're out there unless you send us a comment. Please shoot us a comment and tell you who you are and who you're joining from. I would imagine that most of you are already followers of me, so I may recognize some names. And what I want to do is I want to start with just a little bit of an explanation of kind of how this all came about. If you monitor my feed, you may have noticed that I'm part of the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program, and they've encouraged us to try new formats and experiment with different things. I have quite a few LinkedIn learning courses now. In fact, my 20th just came out, remarkably. I did a poll a couple of weeks ago as I was starting to think about this event, and a couple of folks are joining. Patrick from Belgium. We haven't had a chat in quite a while. Patrick, thanks so much for joining. And we have, I wish my flag knowledge was a little bit better. I think that's UAE. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Oh gosh, Jalal is joining from Austin. Welcome. I was just in Austin for the NIME conference, which is one of the topics. Mike is joining from Long Beach. Oh yeah, I saw that you were coming, Mike. I'm quite pleased. We'll have a lot of time for Q&A today. So, getting back to kind of the story of how we got here, I've wanted to have a way to interact with the community. There are a lot of LinkedIn learning authors that I really admire that do this kind of event on a regular basis. So I want to start doing this once a month. So the poll was just a way to decide what the first topic is, and not so much the how to do low code, no code, because I don't think this is the best venue for that, but more the why, and also whether you've run into resistance, because, as we know, Python really dominates the space. So folks sometimes encounter a situation where they might want to consider using a low-code tool at work, and sometimes there's some issues around that. In fact, I would love to get comments specifically on that issue. What's brought you here today, and if you're a fan of low-code tools, perhaps, but you're not quite sure how to bring the subject up in your organizations. Now, in particular, there's a platform that I have quite a bit of experience with. And I apologize. I realize now that the flag I saw, admittedly very tiny, was Jordan and not the UAE, although I may have seen more than one. So the NIME Analytics platform is one that I'm a fan of, and I was just at the NIME Summit, and they really put on a really great show. So the whole idea of low-code tools is you use visual programming. Some of the folks that have joined, I've known for many years, and I bet I'm not the only one on the call today that recognizes the name Clementine. That was one of the very first ones. What you basically do is you draw a flow chart, and that serves as visual programming. And you can do a remarkable amount with these tools. It can really help you with data integration. But the part that folks forget is that you can use R, Python, pretty much anything you want inside these tools as well. But the visual diagram that you end up with comes very close to being self-annotating. And that's powerful for a couple of reasons, because that means, I believe, that the data scientist that's building the model can more easily collaborate with IT. Let's just take that piece for a moment. Oh, Paul is saying that he remembers Clementine. And of course, I knew that you would, Paul. Who else remembers Clementine? Clementine was acquired by SPSS. And then SPSS, of course, was acquired by IBM quite a few years ago now, in 2009. So that product has not gone away. Those of us that used it back in the 90s, it's kind of nostalgic for us to call it Clementine. But It is now called IBM SPSS Modeler. It's gone through some changes certainly over the years. IBM has positioned it somewhat differently in the marketplace, but it's still around. What other low-code, no-code tools have you all encountered? Oh, Sunday, thank you for that comment that you've used Mendix. Could you possibly follow up with another comment and tell me a little bit more about that one? That one I have not heard of, and I'm curious for sure to hear more. But let's just pick up on that IT piece again with KNIME. Well, in my experience, it can be extremely helpful for the data scientist to prototype some basic data prep. Because in particular, sometimes the data prep that you're going to be doing, in fact, it's always true in my experience, if you're working on a predictive analytics project, you're going to be doing some data prep, some data integration that's unique to the project, or you're doing feature engineering, let's say, that is unique to the project. So I think it can be extremely powerful to prototype that data prep in a tool like KNIME or another no-code, low-code tool, because it's almost instant communication with the IT team, exactly what's going on. Now, clearly, you could also do this in SQL. There's no question that that's also an option, but everybody can see what's going on. So the internal customer can understand something like a KNIME workflow, and then naturally, the IT team will probably take that and do it in a different way that's more scalable, depending upon a number of factors, the volume of data, the size of the project, and so on. But the feedback that I'll sometimes hear is that, oh gosh, we can't do any of that. Just have a device that's beeping that I want to stop beeping. Anyway, the feedback will be, we want to get everybody in the whole enterprise using the same tool or the same set of tools, because then it will facilitate things when we go to deployment. You know, I know that makes a lot of logical sense. It's a rational thing to say, but it's just not consistent with my experience. I find that you always have to address scalability issues and other things when you go into production anyway. So you absolutely can stay in the same tool. A tool like KNIME, for instance. KNIME has what they call KNIME Server, and a lot of their clients deploy right in KNIME in a very scalable way. But I've also seen clients that will build something as part of the project, but then when they go to scale it, they'll translate it into something else. And people sometimes overestimate what that translation process will be, so much so that they enforce a one tool situation in the organization, and I find it starts to distort HR. Has that been, I've got a comment here about, Sunday, so in other words, Mendix is similar to, so is it almost like a Power BI type platform, or does it also do, machine learning, like, neural nets and XGBoost and random forest and that kind of thing? I'm scrolling through where everybody's joining from again, but I would love to see more comments about whether or not you are currently using a low-code, no-code tool yourself, and whether or not it's been embraced by the organization or what that experience has been like. What I want these office hours to become over time is a way that, particularly folks that have seen the relevant courses, like I have an Intro to KNIME on the LinkedIn Learning platform, and LinkedIn Learning has a wonderful Q&A feature, but it's a chat basically. And it tends not to be, with time zones and so on, it tends not to be a chat in real time. Somebody will post a question. I'll get a weekly summary that tells me that somebody has a question. Then I try to be diligent about that and reply. But it's not a venue like this where we can have real-time interaction about these tools. Oh, I see. So Mendix is also building web pages and things like that, and so on. One place to go to find out a bit more about the kinds of platforms that are available in this area is, of course, the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And then, vendors sometimes won't always agree with where Gartner puts them, which quadrant they put them. But what I recommend to folks is that every application that makes it into that report, and there's probably about 20, are worth a look. And if you've never tried using a low-code platform, what I would do is I would seek out the Gartner Magic Quadrant specifically for, right, because you want to make sure that you're in the right report. You'd be looking for the Gartner Magic Quadrant report for data science and machine learning. And you would find that IBM SPSS Modeler is in there, Alteryx is in there, H2O, NIME, Data Robot, I bet, is in there. Who am I forgetting? I'm probably forgetting some brand names, and I mean no offense by doing that. I just don't have all 24 names off the top of my head. Yeah, Paul, I like your comment here about actually Mike and Paul both. Actually, a bunch of interesting comments. If you're all on the same platform, you'll be seeing these comments come out. Patrick, thanks for the clarification about Mendix. More kind of on the software development side, not so much for the data science side. Yeah, and I was quite sure that I hadn't seen it among those 24 or so platforms in the machine learning and data science quadrants. And Mike says here, all it took was showing my supervisor one workflow on NIME, and she was sold, while my colleagues are still very Python centric. So Mike, I've got a very specific question for you, if you don't mind sharing. I've known Mike for quite a while, by the way. He and I worked together in a UC Irvine program that I was a part of. Mike, I'm sure you don't mind me mentioning that. But the reason I'm bringing it up is that with the students that take the predictive analytics certificate program with UC Irvine, I have this kind of an interaction with them quite frequently, sometimes in a group setting, sometimes one-on-one. And that's one of the things that's inspired me to do an event like this, is to have an informal chat and really kind of get into some of the details. So Mike, could you share a little bit more about that? Do you find that you're able to work in NIME and still collaborate quite easily with your colleagues that are Python centric? Because you can actually bring Python code into NIME. Have you tried that yet? Like as recently as June of this year, believe it or not, NIME has added functionality on top of what they already had, which was very good. But what the new functionality does is allow you to create new NIME nodes. So a NIME node is a symbol that goes in the flowchart that I was describing. So you can add new functionality to NIME as a community-based contribution to NIME. And you can do that in 100% Python. You used to have to kind of wrap Java around that code to make it work. But they've made it much easier for Python programmers to add nodes to NIME, which then the whole team can use. Paul has another comment, and I have to admit this this resonates with me. Paul says, Alteryx is also popular, but in practice, tough to license appropriately. And I've seen it tend to degrade to Excel-like behavior for some reason. I can't comment, Paul, on the Excel-like behavior because I haven't observed anything of that myself, but I'm not currently working with a client that uses Alteryx. But what I will mention is that some of these platforms have an open source option and a paid option. And when there is an open source entry point, it does make it a little bit easier, in my opinion, for a single employee to give them a try and then bring them to management like Michael was describing. Yeah, Robert is saying he's seen demos of Data Robot, but again, there's not a free entry point there. But I have certainly heard good things about Data Robot, and there are some Data Robot folks that are very, very active in the community and on the conference circuit. And Data Robot performs quite well. Alteryx and Data Robot both perform quite well in the Magic Quadrant report. Any other comments on introducing low code, no code, and potential? I don't want this to become I don't want to exacerbate the tension between low code, no code, and possibly folks that want to do full code, in Python. But I really want that to be one of the things that we talk about, because that can be a reason why it's a little bit difficult to introduce the tools sometimes. I think they're highly compatible, but that's not always the perception that's seen from somebody that's a full code contributor to the team. Again, a couple of interesting comments here. Yeah, Mike is reinforcing the point that sometimes Mike, if you don't mind sharing, if this is something comfortable talking about, how much was Python a barrier when you join this particular team? Because I think for some folks, they find that they want to work for a particular company, and being 100% Python is really going to be the only option for them. So I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about this HR aspect of it, because I mentioned before that I fear that sometimes it distorts what's happening in HR. So take something like healthcare analytics, for instance, which I'm told as recently as a couple of days ago really is a hot trending area. It's certainly been true with my colleagues at Pandata, where I've been doing some consulting this year. It's an active area for them. But the reason I bring this up is, let's say a company wants to hire someone to contribute to their healthcare analytics team. Well, what if they have 25, 30 years of experience? There are such folks out there, I'm mid-50s, so I think of myself as mid-career, but I've been doing this for almost 30 years. So you have somebody with that much experience. Well, somebody that started in the 90s like myself, will they have used Python throughout their undergraduate and graduate careers? Almost certainly no, right? Because although Python itself has been around since the 90s, it really hasn't been associated with machine learning for that long. It was associated with machine learning for more like 10, 12 years or so. I'm sure somebody will go on Google and help me nail the exact date, but it's really when we start to get things like NumPy and Pandas and so on that folks are starting to perceive Python as something that can really aid machine learning. And there's no question it's powerful at doing that. But back to the person with the 25 or 30 years of experience, they probably can't even get past the HR screen to be interviewed. And here's somebody that maybe, for instance, SAS was always associated with healthcare analytics back in the day. So you could have somebody that's a SAS programmer. What if they know 5 programming languages and they have a working knowledge of Python, but they don't know it as well as somebody that just got out of a master's program, let's say, where they were using Python every day? Is that somebody that we shouldn't even interview? That whole idea makes me very, very uncomfortable. It seems very distorted. And it seems to me that somebody that has learned a half dozen or more languages, maybe starting with something like Pascal or Fortran. I'm not quite old enough to be a COBOL guy, but if someone's learned a half dozen languages, they're not going to have a hard time keeping up with the Python programmers on the team. Paul has a comment, and I didn't know this, Paul. Originally, Python was a simplified Perl with fewer libraries. Well, I do know that that Guido von Rossum, I'm mispronouncing his surname, My apologies to Guido. Also, I can't say Guido the Dutch way, and I'm not gonna try to say that right. But it's pronounced a little bit differently. But when he was coming with Python, I had heard the story, Paul, and I'll be curious to see if this is consistent with what you heard. Is that he was a graduate student at the time? He was teaching a lot of undergrads, and he wanted to come up with kind of a mashup of popular existing languages, and Perl absolutely would have been one of them, I bet. But the sense that I got was that it was a mashup of multiple languages to basically be easy to learn and easy to read. And one of the wonderful features I think that Python has is that when you indent, it's grammatical. So there's so many languages where people will indent in all kinds of crazy different ways, trying to make it readable. But in Python, the indentations are enforced, which I think is quite powerful. Paul, does that sound like what you'd heard regarding the connection with Perl? Yeah, Paul's confirming that. Yeah, so back to the HR piece, and Michael's added a couple of comments. I appreciate that, Michael. He was explaining that the new hires are expected to know Python. And again, some working knowledge of it would make a lot of sense, even if someone's going to be using KNIME to really leverage everything that's going on in KNIME. I'll elaborate a little bit on what form that might take in just a moment. But I find this comment very interesting because I think it will surprise some folks, Mike, but it doesn't surprise me. We already had one come and go because beyond the programming, they didn't have the analytical chops we needed, right? So again, this conversation is not about taking a swing at Python or Python fans, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about this particular issue. I think it's really powerful because it absolutely is something that I've observed, but a lot of folks would find this surprising. And what a lot of folks would say is, how could it be that they were a Python programmer, but they didn't have the analytical chops that the organization needed? To me, it is easy to imagine that would happen, because how would we start to learn something new? The way any of us learn, we go to practice examples and so on. So are there folks that are generating some kind of a model that even has some kind of reasonable accuracy by copying and pasting from GitHub? Of course, happens all the time, right? So the knowledge of the code and being able to get the code to produce output and being able to interpret that for the benefit of the team, or frankly, just to do an effective project from start to finish, are different, independent skill sets. Getting software or code to do what you need it to do, the ability to interpret and explain to others, and just good, plain old-fashioned machine learning project management are absolutely independent skills. Could anybody else has anybody else observed that to be the case, where someone was a talented coder, but just wasn't as comfortable either with some of the machine learning concepts? And again, this isn't to judge the individual. We'd want to coach them and mentor them and make them a stronger data scientist, right? But has anyone else observed a situation where the coding skill set was present in abundance, but some of these other necessary skills were possibly absent? While I'm giving you a chance to respond to that, I want to mention something that I frequently mention in regards to low code, no code versus coding that I think is really interesting. And I've encountered this a lot over the years. And that is that when you're coding, particularly when you're borrowing an existing example, and there's nothing wrong with borrowing and repurposing. We all do it. We all should. Okay. But when you do that, what's probably happening is then you repurpose that. You kind of have your collection of code that works, and you've got your favorite, notebooks, and you know how these things go. In my experience, coders sometimes will grow unfamiliar with what settings are default and what settings aren't default. Or possibly they were never terribly familiar with that to begin with. So for instance, let's say that you're building a single decision tree. And I know that's awfully old-fashioned of me to suggest that you would ever build a single decision tree and not always do random forest. But let's just say for the sake of argument that you were going to do that. And you chose CART. Well, CART, and I've got a decision tree course in the library. I actually did one that used SPSS Modeler that I did 3-4 years ago now. And two, much more recently, 2 levels of detail in those that came out this year that I did them in 9. So this is the kind of thing that I actually talk about in the courses. So let's say that you are trying to adjust the threshold for the Gini coefficient, or you're turning pruning on and off, or you're trying to adjust the severity at which the algorithm prunes in CART. I have been in meetings or on Zoom calls with folks that have lots of existing code to do all kinds of data integration and data prep in Python to generate, let's say, XGBoost or random forest. And we're just having a conversation in Zoom. We're looking at it together. I'm usually not nearly the Python coders that they are, but I can read it quite easily. I can see what's going on. I do think that something that's visual is easier for middle management probably to read than Python is, but I generally don't have any problem following the logic of what they've done. But then I'll make what I consider to be fairly reasonable and straightforward suggestions, like why don't we turn pruning off to see how big the tree gets? Not with the intention of deploying the unpruned tree, but let's turn pruning off just to see just how different the tree is. And folks will go running into a help file because they've had code that they've recycled again and again and again, many times, and they never make any changes to it. Even sometimes from project to project, the data prep will change, but the actual running of the model will change. And I'm trying to avoid, a stereotype here, but I often see that. And why do I see that particular activity or style a bit less often in the low code space? Well, because if you go into low code, something like 9, you have your decision tree learner, let's say, you right click on the thing, you can see all the different settings. Now, the assumption would be if you're coding, you're doing this at a very high level, of course you know all those settings. Not my experience. But in the low code world, you right click on it, you look at all those settings, and absolutely somebody might be a bit confused as to what these things are. They might not know the concept, but what they probably do know is that setting is there. And what they probably do know is how to look that up and help. And the coder would know how to look it up as well, but they probably don't even think to do it because they're running a line of code where a certain setting is implied by the code. It's probably implicit and not explicitly stated. Therefore, they never really think of it as a default. They never really think of it as something that can be changed. And of course, we could be using tools like AutoML that are trying all possible parameters. So you might say, Keith, I'm not too worried about the issue that you're raising right now, but I worry about it because you have to have this conversation with the data. So if the data is taking you in one direction, you might want to double check that that's the right direction to go. And that often means changing some very fundamental settings in the algorithm that are very visual in a low code tool and might be hidden away in optional lines of default code when you're coding. Has anyone else observed this to be the case? Paul, I think that last comment is basically essentially agreeing with me, right? That the tools at least ensure that these types of considerations are built into the workflow to some degree. Yeah, so the notion that you're starting with smart defaults, and do libraries have smart defaults too? Sure, they do, right? But the combination of smart defaults with knowing that you're running with these defaults and then being able to more easily change the defaults That's definitely been my experience. But, recognize, and I recognize it in myself, that there may be a bit of bias here because I started my machine learning career in a low code tool, specifically the Clementine tool that we were talking about earlier. But it served me well for, 25, 30 years, right? Using those kinds of tools. I find that I can be very efficient. And since on a consulting gig, my client tends to be the team's boss or their boss's boss or the internal customer, so it could be like a director of analytics. It could be like a VP of marketing. I find my conversations with that level of management go much more smoothly if I'm working in a low code tool. Oh, Mike has a follow-up on the specifically on the tree. Yeah, and absolutely. Let's talk about this for a moment. What does looking at the unpruned tree versus the pruned tree tell you, or what are some of the things you're looking for? Well, one thing, Mike, is what may have happened is that when I ran it originally, it might not have grown very much, right? So I remember actually being on a Zoom call, and we were working in Python, not in Nime, and this happened, right? So what we did is we ran a model. Now, I was mentoring somebody. I hadn't been part of the project from the very beginning. So there were some earlier decisions that probably I would have decided differently. But the notion is that we were grabbing a data set of convenience, I guess we could call it. I'm not trying to be too harsh, but that's probably what it was. And we had our target variable, and we had a relatively modest number of input variables. I want my dozens or hundreds of input variables when I'm first trying what variables are good, but I think we probably had more like a dozen or so. So we ran it. The tree didn't grow very much. In fact, possibly it didn't grow at all. So immediately, my colleague's conclusion, who was working in Python, was, well, we just don't have any good variables. And he was prepared to give up really that quickly. So I said, well, no, I'm not at all prepared to give up that quickly. So what we did is we turned pruning off. And then if it still doesn't grow with pruning turned off, now I'm starting to get more pessimistic about the variables. If I turn pruning off and it grows like gangbusters all of a sudden, maybe that's a horrendously overfit model. That's distinctly possible. But I'm going to stay in the game longer, if that makes sense, right? Because if default settings is not growing and then turn pruning off and it's growing like crazy, I start to think that there's more right there in front of me without having to go outside of the data set for more variables. I think there's probably more untapped potential there, and possibly we have to adjust some settings. So that would be the quick version. If it doesn't grow under either circumstance, something's probably pretty seriously wrong, and I've got to call a timeout and retrace my steps. If it fails to grow on defaults, but it does grow when I turn pruning off, then I'm going to live inside that data set and work it a little bit harder and see what I can do. Does that help, Mike? Bear with me. I'm going to scroll up a little bit because the comment's been very active, and I want to make sure. So we talked a little bit about the HR piece. It's a new comment. Oh yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree with Paul. I'm just going to read this verbatim, Paul, if that's okay. A really nice thing in a low-code, no-code solution is that it presents a solid, useful set of algorithms, and they are packaged consistently and with some stability. So let's say, for instance, that a regional bank, a regional insurance company. So why do I keep on saying regional? I'm talking distinctively mid-market here, right? Smaller companies, medium-sized companies, and they've got a BI team. Clearly, they have an IT team, but maybe analytics is kind of new, or maybe it's one of those organizations that I used to see a lot of 5 or 10 years ago, where there was one data scientist, like all alone, and that's a really kind of a tough spot to be in. I'm curious in comments if anybody's ever been in that situation where you are the lone single data science or machine learning resource within a small company. Please comment if that's the case. So in situations like that, I really encourage this low code, no code option. And specifically, the reason is naturally you want to grow the team, but I don't want the team to be 100% new hires. That makes no sense to me. This is an organization that hasn't done this before, or maybe they've tried and they haven't done it successfully. And one way or another, I get involved and they're having a conversation with me, probably with my consulting hat, right? And I'm going to encourage them. I've talked about this for years, and it resonates with everybody's experience. I think it's very interesting, this question about should you start with R or Python. So I just want to acknowledge that I saw that question. I want to get back to it. But back to our small to medium-sized company that has basically a non-existent data science or machine learning team and is trying to grow it largely from scratch. I am horrified. I mean, it's not an opinion thing. I just want to be helpful to them. And it concerns me that they would bring a whole new team, completely brand new, from outside, that doesn't know the data, that doesn't know the organization, that doesn't have organizational memory. Sure, absolutely, bring in a couple of brand new hires, and if they're top-notch Python programmers, absolutely welcome to the team, right? But I also want to find that IT or BI professional that I find all over the world, okay? And that's the BI or the IT professional that over time has just become really intrigued with data science and machine learning. I'm sure that they find their way into my classes in many cases. And I describe them as the BI or the IT professional that has the stack of machine learning books on the nightstand. And they are cross-training like crazy. They're on LinkedIn Learning, they're on Coursera, they're reading books. And they've developed an amazing skill set, but they also have 3 years, 5 years, 8 years with the company. They know the data, they know the organization, they know management. And those individuals, the machine learning books on the nightstand person, doesn't even get offered an interview to make a lateral move within the organization. And every time I see it, it breaks my heart. Has anybody observed that, where there was a very talented person internally that was intrigued with making, sometimes it's not even a promotion, folks. Sometimes it's just a lateral move. And management just simply wouldn't have a conversation with them about that because the feeling is that they didn't meet the 30 criteria that HR had for a member of the new data science team. Has anyone observed that? I observe it all the time, and it breaks my heart every time. Because I want a diverse team. I want some people that know the data. I want somebody that maybe was in a data steward role on a project and then essentially is being promoted into a data science role. They can be amazing at what they do. Subject matter experts often are amazing at doing data science. You might even get somebody that started out in customer service at an insurance company, and then they became a claims investigator or something. And they're on LinkedIn Learning like machine learning, and they want a chance just to contribute to the team. Again, they're not looking to run the team. They're not even necessarily looking for promotion, as I've already said. They just want to, they're just like, hey, coach, put me in the game. That's basically what they're saying. And they get discouraged. You know how they often approach me is that I'll either get, I'll meet them during a break where there's a private moment to step aside at a conference. And they'll say that they've been very discouraged from even seeking an opportunity like that internally. So they're thinking about going back on the market, and they wanted to grab me for 5 minutes advice about the job search. And that's just so unfortunate, because that person probably could be a real contributor to the team, even if initially they're a junior member of the team. Oh, Paul is saying, Paul, and I'm sure I know this, but I'd forgotten the details. Have you taught in a certificate program, kind of like what I've done at UC Irvine? Well, yeah, so I'm agreeing with everything that Paul is saying here, that he sees that kind of expertise, and they're all starting to scratch from code. But yeah, what I want to do is I want to tap into that industry experience and get them into a low code tool. You know, the team probably already has programmers. I mean, I don't need everybody to know the same stuff. I want people to know diverse stuff. I do want to revisit though this R versus Python. Okay, so 5 or 10 years ago there was more of a debate regarding that, but I think the pendulum has really swung towards Python. So now I'm trying to answer the question: what's more important for? You can probably sense that I'm a little nervous about mispronouncing your. Ahmed, I think, is your surname, but forgive me for calling you Ahmed. Well, I can handle this. Hassan, I'm embarrassing myself here, but yeah, Hassan Mildeen. I'm sure that was reasonably close. But anyway, I do want to answer your question about R versus Python. Again, the pendulum is really swung towards Python. So if it's to brag about that talent in the marketplace, to be attractive for a new role, I think we would easily form a group consensus that Python would be the more important one. However, R has not gone away, right? But I will say this: if you're contemplating a low-code, no-code tool, Python is probably the more valuable skill to have, because all the low-code, no-code tools are really emphasizing integration with Python. And they integrate with R too, but much more emphasis lately on Python. Where I would favor R as a skill set is if I was joining a team or joining an existing team, in other words, internal or making a move, and I was going to be R was really the destination, because there absolutely are some teams that work in R, usually more on the inference side of the data science world. I just presented a workshop a couple of weeks ago at a conference on data science. It was a data science boot camp. It was actually the TDWI event, which is also a great way to interact with me, by the way. The TDWI is the Data Warehouse Institute. It's a great conference. It's half day and full day workshops, which are lovely. I love the format. And what I always describe to folks at the very beginning of that data science boot camp is that data science is really about inference and prediction. So, and this is the best way to answer that question about R and Python. I would say if your emphasis is inference, R might be the way to go. If your emphasis is prediction, which probably has been the emphasis that we've had during this conversation here today, I would say Python is probably the stronger way to go. Oh, well, Paul, we've known each other for years, so it's not surprising that I'm agreeing with a lot of your comments. But Paul writes here, the problem is if data science is considered a dark art with special knowledge, right? And that's a big if, because in some organizations, that's the direction it takes. And hopefully, if you're talking about a healthy data science practice within the enterprise, that's not happening. But as Paul writes, if that happens, if data science is considered a dark art with special knowledge only available to the coders, then what's completely missing is literacy. That's right. I couldn't agree more. So it's none of this is Python is bad or Python coders have made a poor decision or whatever. What we're saying is that we have to be careful about collaboration between the coders and the rest of the organization. And the danger that Paul raises is a very real one. At the keynote for at NIME to kick off day 2, where we had where we're all in the ballroom watching the sessions together. It was really a great day. This was just earlier this week, actually. Michael, the CEO of NIME, said that the most important book, Michael, if somehow you hear that I've quoted you here, I hope you get a kick out of this. So, so to quote Michael now, the CEO of Nime, he said, he mentioned 2 books, but I only remember one. So my apologies to Michael that I don't remember the full story. But the most important book, are you ready now? You all have your pens or keypad ready? The most important book for a data scientist to read is Hippos Go Berserk. Okay. It's a children's book. Has anybody heard of it? Put in the comments if you've ever heard of Hippos Go Berserk. And Grady, I'm going to answer your question about SAS in just a moment. I was really hoping I would get a couple of people that have heard of this. It's a children's book. I mean, I just bought it for my best friend's 2-year-old, inspired by Michael's comment. Here's the basic idea of the book. I'd never heard of it before. There were a couple of images from the book. I just thought it was so creative. What happens is there's a hippo home alone, and they're a little lonely. So they call their friend, and then there's 2 hippos, and then the 2 friends decide to call their 3rd friend. So then there's 3 hippos, and then 4 hippos. So then the title Hippos Go Berserk comes from the fact that all the hippos call all their other hippo friends, and by the end of the book, they have a big party. So what on earth was Grady? You just mentioned spelling, and I'm not quite sure what you mean. Oh, you didn't. Did you want to have the spelling of the book? Okay. Again, it's a children's book, so it's kind of a joke. But the observation that Michael was trying to make about that is aligned with Paul's comment. If the data scientist is considered having these dark art skills and there's no collaboration, that's what Michael was saying. He said the reason you need a low code tool, low code option, is so that the data scientist, who's the hippo in this story, isn't working alone practicing the dark arts, and then no one really knows what they're doing. And that's going to lead, I'm sure, Paul, you're going to agree with me. I imagine that most of you will. That's going to lead to organizational resistance, and that's not a good thing. Oh, okay. Thanks so much to my colleague that was monitoring the chat, finding the title Hippos Go Berserk. So remember, okay, but remember that is a children's book. So that is, as we say, a tongue-in-cheek recommendation. But I'm quoting Michael, the CEO of Nime there. So let me circle back to SAS, and I also want to make a couple of comments and get your advice about future events like this. Okay, so what about SAS? Well, SAS is exactly what I had in mind, Grady, and I hope I'm pronouncing your first name correctly, about when I was talking about somebody that might have a lot of experience, but that might not come in as the strongest Python programmer. They might be a competent Python programmer, but not top of their HR cohort, to try to get in, because clearly someone that is a SAS programmer can learn how to program into Python. And if they have a lot of industry experience, and when I started out in the 90s, Grady, I actually started out as an SPSS software trainer. I did that for the first several years of my career. And then when, after the acquisition of Clementine, I became much more machine learning focused compared to statistics. And the next thing you know, I was doing machine learning consulting. And when IBM bought SPSS, I very much had more of a focus on machine learning consulting. So for years, I was in this world where SPSS and SAS were considered the leaders in the marketplace. And there was a constant debate between those two. And the perception was that SPSS was much more of the low-code tool, and it was, but you also could do as much programming as you wanted. And SAS was considered the market leader for those that had more of a programming focus. And I always thought the debate was kind of pointless because both tools had a low-code option and both tools had a full-code option. And I think the most important thing was to be productive and not have these kinds of debates. So I'm not trying to create the same kind of debate now, but rather to say, hire someone with amazing skills, get them to work right away, allow them to work into a diversity of tools. And I know the argument that's made that if you have a diversity of tools, you're going to be ineffective. But I'm urging you to consider the opposite point of view. Get them to be productive, produce solutions, and those solutions that are really performing work as a team to get them into production. And you can go to production with a low-code tool, but you can also translate your solution. I'm going to now introduce an acronym that you may not have heard of, and it will have changed a little bit over the years, but there's something called predictive modeling markup language. And, we were just talking about SAS. SAS can export into PMML, SPSS Modeler can, KNIME is PMML compatible. There are ways of getting stuff out of one platform and into another that don't have to make this so laborious that we make an enterprise level decision that everybody's going to have the same skills, everybody's going to know the same platform, everybody has to think alike, because groupthink like that is usually not going to be the way to go. All right, so I want to make a couple of comments in our closing 10 minutes here. I want to make a couple of comments, about 2 or 3 minutes worth, about how I'd like to do these events in the future. I'd like to do these every month. By the way, mark your calendars if you care to. Obviously, I'm going to be announcing it in my feed, but I plan on doing another one of these on December 16th. And I'll be thinking about which topic would be the best fit, but generally I'm going to be drawing upon topics that I cover in one or more of the 20 LinkedIn learning courses. Come January, I guess I'll say this now. If I say this, you'll have to hold me to it. Let me say January or February to give myself a little bit of wiggle room. But I want to eventually introduce a newsletter that would tie into this, where I announce the topic, I kind of get us started in conversation, and then we have this kind of event. So I want to start to do that. One thing about this low-code topic is that it does have some visual elements to it. So I think in the future, when I have a topic that where a visual component could be powerful, I'll probably have some visuals that I want to keep it about the conversation, but I don't want to turn into a class, but I may have a couple of visuals that I share during the event. So if you think that's a good idea, certainly let me know. And there's something else that's a little time sensitive that I want to throw out to you as an idea, because I would like to try this as early as the second half of November. And for those of you in the US, of course, we have Thanksgiving right around the corner. So what I want to try is a LinkedIn audio only event. Now, what's interesting about those is, and this is quite new on the platform, but it's something that we've been learning about as part of the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator. So here are the advantages, I think, for this purpose, is if I get the conversation started in a newsletter, and then we do an event like this where we have a conversation where it's mostly me presenting and responding to comments. When we go to audio only, 2 things are different. One is that I can bring you up on stage and you can speak, right? But you're doing it without having to worry about a webcam and without having to worry about, your audio or whatever. You could be just sitting in your kitchen having coffee, and we can just talk on the phone. So those audio only events are more anonymous than this setting, and where I can get you up on stage. And the other advantage, right? So the second advantage of the audio only events is they don't live on forever. So this will, for instance, go to a YouTube channel that I'm going to set up for the purpose, especially when there's content that we might want to refer to, or if you might want to mention it to a friend that missed it, or someone wants to watch it later. The audio events are not that way. So I can call you up on stage. You can talk about something. Obviously, the folks that are on the call are hearing you describe this, so it wouldn't be something that's super confidential, but it has more of that informal, anonymous feel. We're not on webcam. It's gone as soon as we hang up at the end of it. How many of you would be interested in doing that kind of event as soon as November? It would be an experiment. We would probably just have a small group, but how many of you would like to continue this conversation with an audio only event? Leave me a comment if you could, because I really am trying to do this. It would be just me. There would be no one helping me, host it or anything. It would be super informal, probably a small group. But again, the advantages are you could get up on stage, so to speak, and actually ask your question. We could interact back and forth. Much more of a conversation around the kitchen table than this, where it's chat and then I'm responding. Anybody ever tried one of those on LinkedIn? It's fairly new. I did a poll asking about how many people had attended one, and I think only about 20 or 30% did. Also, feel free to send me a direct message if you were kind of thinking about it, but you reflect on it and you say, that sounds pretty cool. We can do that as well, because it may even be something where I send out some invites or something like that. What you may possibly get an invite if you were here today to just to see if you want to do it with no obligation, obviously. Yeah, a couple of folks are saying that that's interesting. Okay. All right. So, Paul, so by good mall, you mean kind of like that lineup, right? Yeah. Like I start the conversation, then we have an event like this. We do a deeper dive. And then, you know what I'm thinking? It's like, Paul, it's like when I give a talk at a conference and then 6 or 8 people come up to the podium after the talk and then we chat in the hallway. That's what I'm comparing it to. I'm even now, by the way, if anybody has a clever name, so Paul, you haven't done audio on LinkedIn, but yeah, no, but it sounds like it might be a fun way to interact. Those of you that have been especially active in the chat, for instance, can absolutely participate in that audio, because again, I anticipate at least the first couple of times we try it, it would probably be a fairly small group. And it's ethereal. It doesn't last like this does. Final questions, everybody. And my apologies if I missed an earlier question. Please throw it in there again. It's my fault, not yours, if I missed it. The chat has actually been very active. So if I missed a question from earlier, go ahead and copy and paste it down. And I'll make a point to keep my eyes peeled for new stuff. So, by the way, I'm trying to be a little bit more active on Twitter and LinkedIn. I mean, I know Twitter's in the news now, so I'm sorry, not LinkedIn. I'm already super active on LinkedIn, but Instagram. The way I'm going to use it is I've always liked the idea that I could do a short tweet that says something like, the keynote is about to begin, right? And like who the speaker is. And it goes to a feed that shows up on my webpage. My webpage, by the way, is keithmccormick.com. So that's pretty easy to find. But I'd love to stay in touch with all of you. I'll take a look at the chat later. And please do send me a direct message or just comment, even when the event is over, that you're intrigued with the audio event. And I really appreciate you all coming out today. This was the very first one. It was a bit experimental, probably even a bit haphazard, but certainly we're off to a promising enough start that we're going to start doing these every month. Next one, December 16th, and the audio one, no date set, but planning to do that soon. Thanks, everybody.